Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Infosecurity Magazine interview with the Sophos CISO Ross McKerchar. And I'm delighted today to be talking with him about one of the growing threats that we've kind of seen evolving over recent months, and that is the North Korean IT workers schemes. So, Ross, I know Sophos has been doing a lot of work around this threat in particular, and we'll be talking about a playbook for CISOs on this topic, which you recently have published. But first, for our audience, can you explain what the North Korean IT worker scheme is and how that has evolved over recent months?
Yeah, absolutely, and I'm delighted to be here, Beth. So thanks for having me along. So I think most of your audience will be aware that North Korea is quite an unusual nation-state actor. They blend the kind of nation-state approach in terms of the sophistication and their scale with the money-grabbing focus of a criminal enterprise, basically to fund the illicit regime, whether that's a nuclear weapons program. I've also heard that Kim Jong-un's got a bit of an expensive brandy habit, so they need all the dollars they can, basically. They're also known for their creativity. They basically funnel the smartest comp sci grads from their elite universities into these offensive cybersecurity programs. And they've done all sorts of interesting attacks over the years. And the recent focus prior to this North Korean IT worker scheme has been cryptocurrency theft, and they're still doing that quite heavily. But this is kind of another front of the money making operation. It's actually really simple. They basically spin up a LinkedIn profile and just start applying for jobs at primarily kind of Western tech companies. Particularly originally, that's where they started going for software development jobs. And I guess the most unusual thing here is you'd expect that to be their kind of initial entry vector to then go on to maybe steal more things from that company. But actually, a lot of the times that we see this threat, they're actually just trying to earn the salary. Their primary motive is simply to get as many North Korean workers as possible, essentially earning a Western salary, of course, which they will get to keep practically none of it because it will all go back to the regime. Although, of course, there are also examples where, particularly if they get into a particularly interesting organization within, they use that access for kind of onward and more impactful threats against those organizations.
And in terms of the work you've been doing at Sophos with your threat intel team and your response team, have you responded to any incidents involving this type of threat? And if so, how do you respond to this?
Yeah, absolutely. And we responded to a handful of incidents, which is maybe not as many as you'd expect. But there's a couple of important caveats around that. So first off, for every confirmed case of a known North Korea worker, which is typically where you've got some threat intel which says this bank account is associated with North Korea, or these VPN, VPN endpoint addresses are associated with North Korean actors. And for every confirmed case, there's a lot of kind of less cut and dry instance as well. The threat starts to blend with this wider increase in prevalence of individuals basically just securing jobs at multiple companies or maybe contracting their roles out to third parties. And it's not always 100% clear whether that's North Korea or just a whole host of other scams out there that are taking advantage of this, remote first world that we're now in. Now, the good news is, a lot of the work that Sophos has been doing, particularly this playbook that we're going to get to, it actually helps with all of those cases, as well as maybe the point end of that threat, which is the North Korean not North Korean actor. The second point is that the recruitment efforts are scaling up. They started targeting these larger tech companies in the US, but more recent efforts have really scaled up. So we're tracking hundreds of personas on LinkedIn, and each persona we believe is applying for hundreds of roles. So you're in kind of tens of thousands of applications, and that ranges across the spectrum as well. So we've been speaking to, for instance, an individual who was looking to get some development assistance, just a sole individual who's just kind of trying to spin up a project and wanted some assistance. So a single person company, all the way up to the largest companies. And then finally, how do we respond? This is where it's really important for companies to have good audit trails, because essentially what you want to tell is, I mean, you've lost the money, right? You've lost that salary that you've paid. The big question that you need to ask yourself if you've had a threat like this, and to be honest, any malicious worker, regardless of where they've come from, is what has that worker done in the time that they've had access to the company? So a lot of our response revolves around helping organizations, figuring out their audit trails, going through, of course, our own technology, and getting a good, trying to get a comfort level that they haven't either implanted something in the network to regain access, or taken sensitive data.
Yeah, and one of the evolutions of this threat, I think some people have been talking about, is that data point that you said. So it's not necessarily just now about siphoning wages, salaries, but are you seeing that data is being affected? They're using this as an opportunity for extortion as well as that kind of monthly paycheck?
Yeah, so we haven't seen that explicit in our customer base, but we have seen examples of the actual extortion step. But we have seen examples of some of these individuals taking data, and once you've lost that data, you don't know how it's going to be used in the future.
And you mentioned certain roles like being targeted and even just people that are looking for individual support. Have you seen a change in the types of roles, especially with the explosion of AI and the need for people to work on AI projects?
Oh, absolutely. So I'd say that AI roles, as they've become, as AI's as LLMs they've taken off, AI roles have been so prevalent, and they're just chasing the trend. So speaking to some CISO peers that have been spinning up some of those roles, we've been seeing the vast majority of applications to anything AI related being inauthentic. Now, it's not always 100% clear again whether that's solely North Korean operatives, or whether it's just a wider set of people trying to go for a lucrative job. But the end result is the same. You're essentially getting bombarded by fake and inauthentic applications for AI roles.
We've kind of mentioned the CISO playbook that Sophos is offering, and often we find with security advisories, they do tend to focus on the threats, the tactics that people are using, and obviously that's really important. But how are you able to kind of share actionable steps for cybersecurity teams to take to tackle this influx of fake job applications, nefarious job applications that obviously, as we said, may be coming from North Korea, but could be coming from other actors as well?
This is one reason why at Sophos, why I love my job at Sophos, because I actually get to get involved in these it's external comms, which is quite an unusual thing for a CISO for a CISO to be doing. And the reason I'm kind of so passionate about this is because for years and years I've consumed threat reports from from all over the world, and whilst they are useful, the effort required to go from an IOC or even a TTP to having like an actionable steps your company can make to make a real material difference to that company's security posture is often huge, and it's complicated. You might sit down and you can brainstorm 100 ideas around, okay, we take this data, we could do this, this, and this. But in my experience, out of those 100 ideas, 3/4 of them turn out to not really be actionable. You either haven't got the data, or the data's too expensive, or it falls down for another reason. So I was really passionate about, when I got involved in the kind of comms, external comms at Sophos, is trying to bridge that gap for people, really, really focusing on putting out information that is very, very easy to operationalize. The approach that we're taking to make sure that's always the case is to actually take internal projects that we've run. So we've been running our own project to defend against this threat, and we started with that project. So the team that basically created this playbook actually sat on the internal project team as well as myself, and we did all that work to kind of brainstorm and then discard a bunch of controls that we realized were just going to be like unrealistic to implement. And this is the net result of it. It's something that you can kind of be assured wasn't kind of dreamed up as some blue skies project that's never actually seen the light of day in a real organization. It does mean that maybe it's over specific in some cases. We actually felt that going for kind of specificity, even if it doesn't necessarily 100% apply to other organizations, is more useful than making it super generic and then leaving a ton of space for interpretation where you're kind of guessing. I mean, anyone who's tried to follow like a control framework, 27001, SOC 2 or something, is kind of very familiar with this, like trying to figure out what they really mean by a control. We just wanted to take the complete opposite approach and have something that you could just kind of hit the ground running with.
So, what are like some of the key actions that CISOs can kind of hit the ground running with when it comes to the advice you're offering and the actions to be able to take to tackle this threat from the playbook that you and your team have authored?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So I think the first place that every organization should start is not to think about how to prevent hiring a fake IT worker, but to ask the question, have they already hired a fake IT worker? So it's that kind of assume breach mentality. And the good news about that approach is it's actually something that most mature cybersecurity teams, they should be able to make some pretty good progress without having to spend a lot of time working across the business, which essentially means they get started straight away. You can either work with your MDR provider, company like Sophos, or you might have the telemetry internally, or probably most likely a combination of the two. And the playbook includes a bunch of very kind of technical hunting steps that you can take. We haven't gone quite as far as kind of IOCs, but you can plug. We've got more like TTP level, so they're a bit more durable than pure IOCs. Although you can of course plug IOCs into that hunting process. So that's definitely the place that I'd start. Then, presuming you get through that, if you don't get through that, then you've definitely justified the project, right? If you find someone, then you're not gonna have a lot of challenges with buy-in for a wider for a wider project. But if you don't, then you probably need to start finding out, and this is kind of typical like cross-functional executive kind of stakeholder management. You need to figure out who your key project sponsors are going to be and start kind of educating them up about the threat a little bit. And one of the challenges with explaining that threat is it just seems so fanciful. The idea that some nation state is targeting me, you might be a small company or you might think you're very under the radar. But if you speak to your peers, you only have to speak to a couple of people probably before they at least know a company that's been targeted. It is much more prevalent than you think it is, and that's of course driven by the fact that it's kind of like ransomware in that when they target a company, it's not about the company necessarily having some super sensitive data that they can monetize. Every company pays its workers and every company values its uptime. So for the same reason why any company can be ransomed, any company can be targeted by this threat. So you've got to make a good job of explaining that to your other kind of executive sponsors before you kick off on that kind of wider cross-functional project.
Yeah, and it's really interesting that you mention the cross-functionality of the project because obviously it does bring in the HR and recruitment teams as well. So how can CISOs, cybersecurity teams start working with those partners across the business to ensure that everyone's on the same page and is able to tackle this threat across the wider business?
Yeah, absolutely. So actually, when we compiled and you can download it, you can look at it yourself. When we compiled the control matrix, it turns out that about a third of the controls were kind of technical controls that like security teams and IT teams will be relatively familiar with implementing and don't require a kind of ton of cross-functional work. But two-thirds of the controls, so the vast majority of controls, were not like that. And that's what makes this project quite unique versus a lot of defense projects. It's really it is highly cross-functional, quite process focused. You've really got to put a lot of steps into the way that you identify and recruit talent. and then all the way through to finance, the way that you pay people. I think most cybersecurity teams, it will kind of take them to places that they're maybe not super familiar with, into kind of financial controls. You might be surprised. You might find your finance team have actually got a bunch of financial controls that maybe you've never been closely involved in, that actually turn out to be quite useful in this case. Or if not, it might be an opportunity to help show up some of those financial controls. And the challenge is, I mean, just honestly, I've got a kind of technical background. Most CISOs do. This is the kind of project we don't like. If we're going to be honest, most of us like to get a bit of technology, work with a technical team, deploy it out across the organization in such a way that we don't have to talk to anyone. We just we do it behind the scenes and we get some cool data and we build some cool things. This is like the total opposite of that project. It's all about talking to people, understanding these business processes, figuring out how you can put those process controls in, which is why it's so critical that you I'd say a couple of things actually. So first, getting a really strong executive sponsor who's not just the CISO, because the CISO is always asking for this stuff. Getting your HR, your HR head on board, or maybe your CFO. Those would be the two that I'd probably, kind of speak to first, because out of those 2/3 of non-technical controls, I think they basically all lie inside of like either HR or the CFO organizations. So I'd start by getting them on board, and then secondly, this is very much the project where you want an experienced project manager on, someone who's very, the more senior project managers who are very, very familiar with pulling together that cross-functional program would be my kind of top tips.
Great. Yeah, it sounds like it would be a really interesting project for a CISO to embark on, especially as there is a lot of pressure on senior cybersecurity leaders to be more involved in the business in a wider context anyway.
Yeah, and we actually managed to. I mean, I love projects where you can kind of tack on some really business aligned goals. So it's not just seen as like often so security projects, the best you can do is to not increase friction. Like that, like winning is just keeping things to status quo whilst being more secure. This is actually a project where we had an opportunity to like streamline, improve some of our recruitment tooling and processes. So yes, this is definitely that type of project where you really can actually sell some opportunities for improvement, as well as just saying, well, we're more secure, but you don't see it.
So then, if I was to ask you to get out your crystal ball and have a look into the future of how this threat is likely to evolve, what do you think should be top of mind for CISOs as we look ahead?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the good news on this threat, the good news, and there's kind of a less good news story here. The good news on this threat is, there are a set of controls that you can implement that tighten up your recruitment process. What we're seeing now is we're seeing this kind of lag between the world moving to remote working and our controls keeping up. So they're exploiting almost that gap, which is very common in security. There's always, when the world moves on, we're always kind of we're always trying to catch up. So that's the good news story. This is a threat that you can defend against. It's not like super hard. It's work. I think the more challenging piece is when you try and intersect AI with this. I think we're kind of fast approaching a world where it's kind of hard to trust that the person on the other end of the line is kind of either who they say they are, or is not using kind of real-time AI filters to change their voice or change how they look. It also makes it easy to, you can spin up a CV in seconds, so you can scale, it helps to scale this threat. So we're in this world where, it's a classic arms race. Yes, the controls are easy, but everything is pointing towards the threat actors are going to have quite a lot of opportunity to use AI to do more, scale up, create more CVs, create more fake personas, and actually be more, be harder to differentiate when they use AI to kind of circumvent the controls that we implement. So it's just another front. There's lots of fronts in cybersecurity that open up all the time, and we're going to have to we're going to have to be considering this risk for forever, basically.
Yeah, so playbook that you have launched seems like a great place for cybersecurity professionals to start in terms of defending against this threat. So, thank you for sharing some of the insights into that with us. And for anyone watching, we will include a link to the playbook in the video description for viewers to explore. And I'm sure you can reach out to Ross and his team as well if you've got any further questions or things you want to find out. But for now, thanks everyone for watching, and we look forward to seeing you again very soon. Thanks, everyone, and thanks, Ross.
Thank you.